Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Fisher Fitness Coaching Podcast. This is episode 51. This episode I have Sophia on from Apollo Nutrition. I met Sophia in London a couple of weeks ago when she did a presentation on this very subject. So we started chatting after that, and I just thought it would be a good idea to get her on and ask her some questions about it, because it's something that I don't really know much about, and having a good relationship with food is paramount to succeeding in most body composition goals when it comes to fat loss, building muscle. I think, just general health as well. I think we all need to have a good relationship with food. So Sophia gives some really, really good tips and insights into not only this, but also with or about ADHD. Any questions on any of what we discussed, ask away, and you can contact Sophia on her Instagram handle, which is linked in this description. So I'm sure she'll be more than happy to answer your questions too. So here it is. Enjoy.
I always ask the guest to do like a little intro. So do you want to go through who you are, what you do, and who you help, first of all?
My name is Sophia, and I'm a nutritionist and a food relationship coach. So I specialise in supporting my clients with the way that they feel about food and the way that they feel about their body and how that is impacting their food choices and their choices in regards to like exercise, routine, and them actually being able to achieve their goals. Because long-term sustainability of all of the stuff that I work on with my clients is really, really important, so that we actually get those lifelong changes. And I also specialize in supporting people who have ADHD, because making change when it comes to nutrition and when it comes to food is generally a little bit more complex for people that do have ADHD.
How long have you been working with people with ADHD?
Probably the whole time I've been coaching, which is coming up for 6 years now. I was actually diagnosed myself just over a year and a half ago, but it's really, really common for people who have ADHD themselves to then attract other people who have it. And I think there's a lot of people who aren't diagnosed. So, some of my clients are diagnosed, others of my clients know they have ADHD, but a diagnosis isn't an option, or maybe they're on a waiting list, or they're not bothered about having a diagnosis. So I think it's important for people to understand the way that their brains are formed and know that they don't have to be diagnosed to know that they have ADHD and it's something that they struggle with. I also work with quite a lot of clients who don't have it. It just seems to be that a lot of my clients do have ADHD.
That makes sense, yeah. And am I being ignorant if I say that ADHD has become a lot more sort of apparent in today's world? Is that because people are understanding more about it, or what's the reason for that, do you think?
It's not ignorant at all. It's definitely true. There's more people talking about it. There's more people realizing that they have it. So there's more people seeking out a diagnosis. I think there's more people talking about it online as well, because maybe people, like, I've always known there was something different about me. I've always known that my brain worked differently. I could almost like tap into and sense a lot of the ways that people were feeling. And sometimes I absorbed that, maybe at a detriment to myself. So that's definitely something I've had to work on for me. But I always felt like I had a sixth sense somehow, but I just didn't know what it was. So I always knew there was something. And then I think more people are learning to accept themselves and understand the way that their brains work without shame and judgment. So they feel happier and more comfortable talking about it. And then because more people are going to social media to talk about different things and, these sorts of issues, then that's why it feels like there's a lot more noise and a lot more people opening up about their own experiences and about ADHD as well. And I think it's great. I think we all need to be learning. And I know that this is how I feel, that coaches need to be educating themselves on ADHD and how it impacts food and exercise and mental well-being and stress levels and all of these things, because we're supporting clients who are humans, that, you know, more and more people are being diagnosed, more and more people that we support as clients are going to be having symptoms and signs of, you know, not just ADHD, but autism, you know, dyslexia, all of these things that can impact our clients' ability to be able to achieve the results that they want to achieve.
Definitely. That's where this came from. Your presentation you did in London a couple of weeks ago, I don't know much about it at all. And that's why I thought it'd be good for you to come on and chat about it so I can learn more. Because I mean, I don't know, I wouldn't know. There could be clients I've got who have symptoms of ADHD. So those who don't know exactly what it is, what actually is ADHD and what are the most common symptoms?
So it's a brain disorder, the way that somebody's brain is formed. And I think that's really important to get across, because it's often grouped together with mental health and mental illness. And obviously somebody could have ADHD and mental illness as well, but it is a different thing. It's not something you can recover from or cure yourself from. Medication can help if people, you know, have a good response to it or choose to try it, but symptoms need to be managed with lots of other different sort of coping strategies as well. And then there's lots of different symptoms, and they show up very differently in different people, differently in males compared to females. Females are often very, very good at masking symptoms, which can make getting a diagnosis very difficult. It can mean that a lot of people around you would think, oh, but you've got your shit together and you're successful in different areas of your life. So, you know, what is the issue? But that's because so many of us have been brought up in a world where it isn't, you know, necessarily easy for people with ADHD. So we've learned how to paint on a smile and pretend that everything's okay, when internally that can be a very different story. So there's lots of different symptoms, but ADHD, it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So, you know, lack of attention, emotional dysregulation, the hyperactivity. When we think of ADHD, we often always think about that naughty kid in the classroom at school who was running around causing chaos, but that hyperactivity can be mentally as well. So a constantly busy brain, like really struggling to shut that off and be able to wind down and relax properly, which we were just talking off air a little bit about. Emotional dysregulation, so really struggling to deal with emotions, understand the way that you're feeling and regulate those. It's very common for people with ADHD to be impulsive, so to just make quick in the moment decisions without really thinking of the long-term consequences. So yeah, those are, I mean, other symptoms like people can struggle with sleep. That's a massive one with ADHD. And then the issues with food that we see. There's a massive increased risk of people with ADHD struggling with their relationship with food, struggling with binge eating especially. So a 30% increased risk of struggling with binge eating for people that do have ADHD. And again, that's why as coaches, I think it's our responsibility to be recognising these things.
Mm-hmm. Would it be, do you think, fairly obvious to someone that they may suffer from ADHD? So would they, you know, would you kind of think, okay, I suffer from this, and this, I think I suffer from ADHD. Is it really obvious, or would you have to go and get professionally diagnosed? Is that the right saying, the right word?
Yeah, I think if a diagnosis is accessible, whether that's you've decided to go private and it's affordable, or, you know, you speak to your GP and get on a waiting list, because waiting lists are actually a lot shorter than what people realise in so many places. Or there's the option of right to choose, which people can do through the NHS, and that can be quicker as well. I think that can be helpful, but if people have ADHD, they will know. Like, they will know that their brain is formed differently, that it's not just because a lot of the symptoms of ADHD, a lot of the stuff I spoke through there, people will be thinking, well, I feel like that, and I know I don't have it. Like, so many neurotypical people also struggle with those symptoms, because a lot of it is just day-to-day life stuff, and it's just normal in a busy and fast-paced lifestyle to struggle to switch your brain off, for example, or be impulsive at times. But it's the impact that the symptoms have on somebody with ADHD on their overall life, the negative impact. Sort of with ADHD, people often massively internalize difficult experiences and end up going over and over them in the head a lot, and really struggle mentally as a result of that. And with ADHD, it's also, some people refer to it as a dopamine deficiency disorder. So a lot of the behaviors and things that we do are to try and seek out that dopamine. So when it comes to people with ADHD, a lot of the responses and reactions and urges that we have can almost feel like an out-of-body experience, like we have no control over those things. And we do. There's ways and means that we can learn to manage these things more, but that's going to feel very different to somebody neurotypical who's like, well, yeah, I make a choice and then I do the thing. For somebody with ADHD, it's, well, it's already happened without me even realizing. So yeah, I think if people have it, they will know and be aware that things are different for them and their brain does work differently to other people's.
And it's different to ADD, right? It's completely different, or is there similarities?
No, it's so ADD is ADHD. That's just what it used to be called. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I
Yeah.
thought they were two different things. Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Fair. So you touched on it earlier about the relationship with food. So what are the most common signs of having a poor relationship with food then?
For people with ADHD?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So with sort of body composition goals and dieting, a lot of people who have ADHD would constantly be stuck in a yo-yo cycle, like a yo-yo dieting cycle. It's very, very common that people with ADHD would describe themselves, well, two things: as a perfectionist and somebody who has an addictive personality. And that's not me saying everybody who has an addictive personality has ADHD, but I think so many people who have perfectionist tendencies and an addictive personality have ADHD, and they just probably don't realize that they have it. So obviously when that comes to food and nutrition and training, it can lead to periods of time of being 100% on it and team no days off, to then the complete opposite end of the spectrum where it's a real struggle to make any food that's nutritious and do any of your gym sessions. So it's that all or nothing mindset that people with ADHD can really struggle with. And it's, I think as well, there's a massive misconception for so many people who struggle with these things that it's down to a lack of discipline and it's laziness. People with ADHD already beat themselves up for feeling like they're being lazy all the time, but I cannot even put into words what ADHD burnout and ADHD feels like. It's almost as though somebody has just completely switched off your energy levels in your brain and you've just run into a brick wall, and there's so much brain fog and so much fatigue and overwhelm that you end up just paralyzed, like unable to do anything. I have periods of time where I'm literally just sat in my office looking out the window and an hour and a half's gone, and I could not even tell you. That's less and less now, especially now that I'm medicated and I understand myself more and I know how to recognize when things are getting to that point. But that can be very difficult for people with ADHD when it comes to food, because there's often the narrative of, I know what to do, but I just can't do it. And then people with ADHD would be way more likely to be like, oh, well, then I'm a failure, I'm just lazy, it is just discipline and willpower that I need. And actually it's not. It's understanding your brain more and learning how to support yourself with the symptoms that you're facing. So that can be very difficult. The whole fitness industry narrative can be very toxic for people with ADHD, because We know that there's so many coaches and PTs out there that are reinforcing, stick to this meal plan, track this exact number of calories, train 5 times a week, do cardio every day, hit this number of steps. And actually, for people with ADHD, for so many of them, it reinforces that you have to be perfect to be fit and healthy, which we both know is bullshit. It's about consistency, flexibility, being adaptable. And those things are even more important for somebody who has ADHD. I've kind of forgotten the question that you asked. Am I even still answering it?
Yes. I think so. You're sort of going on to the next question. So that current question was, what are the most common signs of having a poor relationship with the food?
Yeah.
With people with ADHD. But the next one is very similar. It's, how does ADHD affect the individual's relationship with food, and what can be done to improve them?
Yeah. So sort of very irregular eating patterns are common for people with ADHD. So a lack of appetite, often earlier in the day, because we have busy brains all of the time. And then when we are busier with work, with looking after kids, with doing stuff at home and jobs, that can then end up shutting down our appetite. So struggling with erratic eating patterns, missing meals, and then overeating when you do eat can be something that people struggle with. A lack of desire to even eat food at times. It can feel like eating is stressful, something that you don't have time for, because hyperfocus is another symptom of ADHD. So focusing on something and getting completely lost in a task, so that there's task blindness. So that would mean you end up stuck on something, and whether it's a piece of work or something that you're reading or researching, and you don't break away to eat, to drink, to go to the toilet. It can be hours and hours that you sat there, again, just feeling like time has passed and disappeared, and you're not really sure how it happened. So that can have an impact on eating and being in that regular eating routine, which we know is very important. There's sensory issues for a lot of people with ADHD, so struggling with different tastes and textures and smells of food can be an issue. So then all of these things added together can lead to excessive restriction, like deficiencies, relying on lots of processed foods, but then on the other side of the spectrum, like only ever eating whole and unprocessed foods and becoming obsessed with that from a restrictive point of view is a risk as well. And then the risk of overeating and binge eating. So it's sort of every issue on that food relationship spectrum is more of a risk for people who do have ADHD. And then as far as what can be done to, for people to support themselves, do you remember that whole long, massive list of stuff I went through in the presentation? Because
vaguely.
Yeah, there's a lot. But maintaining a regular eating schedule, regardless of feeling hungry or not, very important. So sort of meal, snack, meal, or, some clients that have ADHD don't snack, and that's fine. I tend to not snack. I just prefer more balanced meals and more satisfying meals, but everybody's going to be different with that. Making sure that you are prioritizing stress management, emotional regulation, and sleep is very important as well, because those things can easily become dysregulated for people with ADHD. So I think a morning routine and an evening routine is so, so important for people with ADHD. Making sure that you are trying to plan and prepare food in advance, so that when it comes to having a meal, you're not having to go to the fridge and deciding what you're having. Like, it's there, it's ready, you know what it is you're having. Setting reminders and timers for you to, like reminders or a alarm to remind you to eat your meals. That can be very, very helpful. Looking at your nutrition from an inclusive perspective. So instead of a restrictive mindset of I can't have this, or I shouldn't eat that, or this food is bad for me, it's thinking, how can I include more nutritious foods into my diet? How can I eat more plant-based foods, more protein, more fruit, more veg? How can I add more colour and more variety to my plate? How can I nourish my body? Because we want to be looking at these things from a positive, inclusive mindset rather than just constantly restrictive. If somebody's yo-yo dieting, having a period of time away from dieting, away from fat loss, away from body composition goals, to get themselves in a regular eating routine, get them regulating their emotions, get themselves in a healthy routine with exercise, and doing that with the focus on wanting to feel better and show up better rather than just a fat loss perspective. Because it's so important to have that structure in place. I'm trying to think what else. God, there's loads.
It makes some really good points, yeah. And that's that list you just mentioned. It's going to help people with poor relationships with food who haven't got ADHD, right? So it's really, really useful stuff. And I was going to say as well, when you mentioned, so people with ADHD more likely to binge in the evening because they've been so focused on other things during the day, so they just completely forget about food. Is that common? And and when the evening comes, they almost like they refocus and think, shit, I'm absolutely starving, I've had no food, and then they just binge in the evening. Is that a common thing?
It's common. It's, usually when they start eating, they realize how hungry they are.
Yeah.
And that can be when like the speed of eating increases, which again increases the risk of eating, and like the impulsivity as well. So being impulsive, that can have an impact on increasing the risk of binge eating. Dopamine seeking from food. So looking for dopamine, we get a higher dopamine response to highly palatable foods, higher calorie foods, processed foods. So if somebody has been super stressed, not been regulating their emotions, not been looking after themselves through the day, and they're finishing work and they're feeling very drained and exhausted and they're experiencing some of that fatigue, their brain's almost like, right, where can we seek out some dopamine? Where can we get that quick fix? So that is where food can come into it. And it's so easy to see how with our lifestyles as well, it gets to an evening and people are wanting to sort of reclaim some of that mental and emotional headspace for themselves, have some downtime for themselves. We often associate that with food. And then if people are struggling to regulate their emotions, or they're trying to, it's very common with eating that a lot of people think they're an emotional eater, but they're not actually soothing their emotions. They're just numbing themselves or distracting themselves from the way that they feel. So all of those things combined for people with ADHD can be very, very difficult, and then massively increase the risk of binge eating. And also then if people with ADHD are trying to diet and trying to restrict, and they're falling into that all or nothing mindset of, oh, this food is bad, or, this food is good, I shouldn't eat this, it's naughty, have a little bit of it, then add in being impulsive and emotional dysregulation and the brain fog and fatigue, it's so clear to see how that can lead to binge eating.
Yeah. So what do you recommend to your clients then, for someone who is really struggling with like evening binging, but to try and get that dopamine hit? So I've mentioned, because I've had a few people in the past ask me, and I reply with something like, I don't know, do things which you enjoy, like go for walks, have a bath, do a puzzle, do some drawing, listen to music. Is that something you would recommend as well?
Yeah, I put a post up on Instagram the other day about how I notice urges to overeat when and then in certain situations. And one of those things is when I'm not finding joy in other places and I don't feel like I'm getting dopamine from other sources. But for people with ADHD, it's very difficult because all of those things you said are great, but nothing is going to give us that hit like food does. Like food tastes amazing. It's accessible. It's like, it's accepted within society that people eat or overeat or, focus on these highly palatable foods. So it's so quick and easy. And it obviously tastes amazing. It can be soothing. It gives us that comforting feeling as well. So it's important to acknowledge and understand that it's going to be very difficult to find something that will replace the way food makes you feel in that moment. But we want to be thinking about the longer term. So how do you want to feel tomorrow morning? How do you want to feel this time next week? And so with people who have ADHD, it's very important for them to set their environment up for success. So it doesn't necessarily mean telling themselves they can't have certain foods or they shouldn't eat certain foods. But if you really struggle with binge eating and it's like higher calorie processed, like chocolates and biscuits, can you get smaller portions? So there's a smaller chocolate bar in the cupboard, or a portion of 2 or 3 biscuits in one of those mini packs, rather than having the whole thing available, and keeping this stuff in the cupboards, so that if you're going in the cupboard to get it out, there's almost a pause implemented there where your brain might kick into gear and you sort of realize what you're doing. A regular eating schedule, again, regardless of hunger, so important. And not just, again, this is often what people try and do when they're dieting. It's like fruit for breakfast, salad for lunch, and then they wonder why they're raiding the cupboards at night. It's nourishing foods, it's balanced meals, proteins, carbs, fats, sauces, seasonings, cooking in oils, all of these things that diet culture tells us to be terrified of. If you are binge eating, you need to be including those things regularly and eating to actual satiety, rather than demonizing foods and trying to live like you're constantly dieting. All of those sort of techniques that you described before is great, and people need to have those in their routine, because those are things that are going to help to regulate their emotions. But having things that are quick and accessible in the moment. So, if I'm working with a parent, I can't tell her on an evening, if you want to binge eat, go out for a walk. Like, we've got to think about things that are realistic for the client in front of us. So somebody in that situation, it might be like, if you've got that urge to binge eat, can you paint your nails, run a bath? Can you listen to some music, or listen to a podcast, do some breathing exercises, do 5 minutes of meditation? And there's a technique. Have you heard of a technique called surfing the urge?
No, I haven't.
So it's learning to sit with an urge and recognizing and understanding that after about 20 minutes to half an hour, it will pass. Because these urges come, the more times we respond to them with what the urge is telling us to do, the harder and the faster they come, because it's then automatic. Whereas if we can sit with it and recognize it's going to feel very uncomfortable and it's going to get more intense, when it hits the top point of that urge, it then starts to come and settle back down and the urge reduces. And if you can sit with it or distract yourself while it's building up, which is where somebody would go off and use one of the emotional regulation techniques, it's then going to subside over time. And the more times you're able to do that, the less those urges are going to come. It's very commonly used with like drug addicts and alcoholics, and we know that food isn't addictive in the same way. But I think for a lot of people who have ADHD, the feelings that food can give us can be very addictive. And I think it's looking at, especially with binge eating, it's looking at supporting yourself with your overall health and well-being, rather than it just being about the food and just being about nutrition and thinking, oh, well, if I fix this with how I eat, then those urges to binge are going to go. Because actually, it's more about the overall health aspect of things. And like, therapy, working with people that can support you to deal with these things. And then, if somebody has binge eating disorder, reaching out to their GP for help and support as well is very important.
Great tips, yeah. So I take it mindfulness plays a huge role in all this. So you mentioned there about, like, what's it called, surfing the urge. That's very mindfulness based, isn't it? Would you say that's got a huge part to play in managing symptoms?
Yeah, it's one of the most effective ways of managing symptoms of ADHD. But we have to remember as well, for people with ADHD, if we then say, okay, so we know mindfulness is great, go off and meditate for 20 minutes, they're just going to laugh at you. Like, with such a busy brain, mindfulness can feel painful and impossible. So again, it's meeting people where they're at. And some of my clients do very quick breathwork practices, very quick somatic practices where they sort of come back to their physical body. Because again, with a really busy brain and emotional dysregulation and impulsivity, it can be like, feel like out of body experiences. So a lot of, mindfulness is focusing on coming back to the present. And that doesn't have to look like a 40-minute yoga session. It doesn't have to look like half an hour of journaling. It can be 5 minutes of intention setting in the morning. It can be 2 minutes of breath work before you get out of the car and go into work. It can be a 5-minute meditation while you're driving, or when you're in bed, like a bedtime meditation. It can be 2 questions to ask yourself before you have your meals. One of the best techniques that I work on with my clients is called the pause. I've got it on my hand, like tattooed on my hand, pause, because even though I talk about this stuff all day, every day, because of my ADHD and also our lifestyles being busy and hectic, I forget to pause. I eat mindlessly at times. Like, that's part of being human. But the pause is basically, before you eat anything, pausing and checking in with yourself. How hungry am I? What is my intention? Why am I going for this food choice? Is it hunger, or is it another need? Is it another emotion that could be better met long term by doing something else? Because in that moment, we will probably nearly always want the food. And I don't lie to my clients about that. I don't say, you're going to love journaling more than a family-sized bar of Galaxy, because what's the point in setting people up to fail? In the moment, you will probably nearly always want the food, but is that the right choice for your long-term health? Is that the choice that you want to be making all the time? So getting people to pause, check in with themselves, just give themselves the chance to settle all of their emotions, come out of that fight or flight mode, and make a conscious choice. Because how many people are just flying around on autopilot, gets to the end of the day, they're like, oh, well, I think I had half a sandwich and a bite of an apple and 3 crisps, but I'm not too sure, because it was just all on autopilot without coming back to my body and giving myself the chance to think. So mindfulness is absolutely essential. And when you start practicing mindfulness more in little bursts throughout the day, so like there's a little stuff I do that's like a minute first thing, a minute when I go out for my walk, like a minute before my breakfast. And when you've got these little things throughout the day, it's then so much easier to think, right, I can pause before I'm eating, or I can sit down and spend 10 minutes eating a meal instead of standing up in the kitchen and trying to do it while I'm multitasking. It makes mindfulness in general, makes mindful eating seem like it's actually possible, instead of just this woo-woo thing that, seems so far out of reach.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So, like, firstly, how are you doing with managing all this? Because from everything you said like so much awesome information, but it sounds so intense. It sounds it can be really intense. And like, how are you doing with managing it?
Yeah, generally most days pretty good, but like everybody, I do have periods of time that are more difficult. Like, I notice if I'm not spending time, and I know we were talking about this before we hit record, if I am not having downtime for myself on my own, away from other people, so like away from my husband, like we spend a lot of time together, proper quality time together as well, but I need time on my own to feel properly rested, and I have to schedule that in my diary. And it doesn't mean that that's then free time to make social plans or to do house jobs. It means that's just as important as me showing up to the dentist or, all the other stuff that we do for ourselves. So I need to make sure I'm doing that. I need to make sure that around work commitments and like especially events and public speaking stuff, that I have time to myself to recover from that, because I find it, I love being in that setting and I take so much from it, but I find it very draining and exhausting. So making sure I plan stuff like that in is key. Making sure I do eat regularly is very important. Like, I don't feel hungry. If I was listening to hunger, I probably wouldn't eat until about 4 or 5 p.m. every day. But I know that if that happens, I'm probably going to end up overeating. My food choices will be less nutritious. I'm not giving my body or my brain the energy that it needs to function and thrive. And, you know, I want to be able to go to the gym. I want to be able to take the dogs out walking and have that energy alongside being able to concentrate with work. So a lot of it is not necessarily always listening to hunger levels or how my body is feeling, but doing what I know I need to do long term. But yeah, it's far from perfect. I still have times that are very, very difficult. And I think we all do, right? And I don't think we should hide that, because I'm talking about this and I know all of the techniques and I speak to my clients about it all, and I'm constantly reading research and learning about new ways to support not just my clients, but myself as well. But then I still have days and times when I know what I should be doing, but I just don't do it. And that's part of being human.
Yeah, like we said before we recorded, that I find it very hard to switch off and actually relax and have time for myself. Like when I think I'm relaxing, got the TV on, etc., I'm not really relaxing. I'm still thinking about work or stuff to do with work, clients, this and that. So it's not really actually switching off. So these tips you've mentioned are gonna really help me as well.
I think
all about like mindfulness, isn't it?
I think, yeah, and I think lowering the barrier. Like, again, so many people say, oh, well, you know, watching Netflix isn't relaxing and it's bad for you. And it's like, no, if you love watching a series on Netflix, then an hour or two on an evening or whenever is more than okay. Is binge watching Netflix till 4 a.m. every night of the week going to be good for you? No, of course not. But again, you know, not having to subscribe to so much of what we see online about always having to optimize things and everything having to be 100%, because it doesn't need to be that way for you to lead a happy life. But one thing I do know, if I am not doing things that fill my cup and that give me dopamine from other sources, so if I'm not getting outside, getting outdoors and time in nature, people with ADHD often call it green therapy. It is absolutely essential for your brain to be getting outside, getting some daylight, whether it's 5 minutes a day, ideally more, but again, sort of lowering that barrier, really, really important. And if I'm not doing those things, if I'm not looking after myself in other areas, if I'm not, you know, managing to stay in a routine and do some of the mindfulness stuff, if I let those things slip, that's when I start having urges to turn to food, to overeat. I mean, those urges are normal at times anyway, but even more when I'm not doing those things to look after myself.
Yeah, for me, going outside is again, like yourself, is crucial for me. And you mentioned Netflix earlier. I would love to be able to sit down and watch 3 or 4 episodes of a really decent Netflix series, but I just can't focus enough. And I don't know what it is. I just can't, my brain just won't sort of, and I haven't got ADHD, but I find it very hard to focus on a series, you know, for 2-3 hours long. It's weird. I'll end up on my phone. I'll end up thinking about something else. And yeah, it just goes off on one.
Me, if I try watch a film on like a Saturday or a Sunday, it takes me a good few days to actually get through it, because I'm constantly pausing it, getting up, getting down, going to do this. Then I go into the kitchen and I think, oh, while I'm doing this, I'll do that, and that. And I get distracted. And then I'm like, right, I'll reply to a client. Then I end up checking my emails. Before I know it, I've had the film paused for 2 hours. And me and my husband always joke, because we'll press play. And within 10 seconds, because my husband has ADHD as well, we'll have paused it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. That's not always the case. Obviously, we can watch stuff sometimes. But we always laugh because it's like we made it to 3 seconds of.
Does that work quite well then? Because you both got ADHD.
Yeah, I think it does and it doesn't. So it's very, very common for people who have ADHD to then end up with other people who have ADHD or autism or dyslexia, because again, we sort of attract our own kind. But us both knowing we have ADHD, and his symptoms show up very differently to mine. So again, it's that personal sort of responsibility of knowing what you need to be able to regulate yourself and support yourself with. And then for us, like, communication is absolutely key. So talking about things, as soon as something comes up, as soon as I start pissing him off or he starts annoying me, never, ever letting those things build up. It's like we talk it out straight away. We have like a little rule of as soon as we think it, we say it, which is generally how people with ADHD are anyway. But instead of internalizing things and letting tiny little stuff build up and up, it's like, no, we chat about it and we work through things. He's great. I'm so lucky that he is so understanding and supportive. Because he actually gets, it's funny, he actually gets a lot of his dopamine from spending time with me. And I get a lot of my dopamine from spending time on my own. So obviously sometimes he's like, oh no, I really want to go out and do something or spend time together. And I'm like, no, I really want time on my own. So
poor guy.
No, I do love spending time with him, but I equally love spending time on my own as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've given some amazing advice, like relationship advice.
I am the word, like my relationship history. I am not the person to be taking relationship advice from. I think like all of this stuff, it's like food though, isn't it? You've got to fuck up 1,000,000 times to learn about yourself, to learn about what you want and what's going to be supportive. And that's the way with food or relationships.
Without doubt. Yeah, definitely. So I've got one more question, if that's okay.
Of course.
What would you say to someone who is listening to this right now who thinks they may suffer from what we've been talking about, be it ADHD and or a poor relationship with food? What would your advice be to that person?
Follow me.
Yep.
I've got a webinar similar to the chat that I did on our live day. So it's all about ADHD and food. It goes through a lot of the points that people can focus on and things that they can try and do to support themselves. So anybody can message me and I will send you that over and you can just watch it on your own. But I think sort of trying to take a step back and slow everything down and working out what it is you need to do to support yourself. Because, I mean, ADHD or not, that's so important that we all learn about ourselves and what we need to thrive. Because so many people get used to just surviving and just getting through that they don't know what it feels like to feel great most of the time. Because that's, you know, when you're looking after yourself, that's how it should be. And again, it's not going to be perfect. We all have difficult times and shit times, but most of the time we should feel great. And it's absolutely possible to get there. But if people think that they do have ADHD, then, you know, deciding if they want to seek out a diagnosis, if it's important to them. And then if it's not, you know, it's absolutely valid to know that it is something that you have, something that you struggle with, and then learning about how your symptoms show up and thinking about what's realistic and practical for you to put in place to be able to support yourself. And then when it comes to your food relationship, again, very similar advice to what I've said there, but if somebody is dieting and constantly chasing fat loss and trying to restrict and then struggling with periods of binge type behaviors, you've got to step away from dieting. You have to do that. And as coaches, we need to be more comfortable with saying to clients, look, I know you came to me for fat loss, but we need to work on this, and this first. And then we can, when, you know, you're not going to be saying to somebody, you can't ever diet again, because that's not true. Like, it's absolutely possible to lose body fat if you have ADHD, but being in that healthy eating routine and nourishing your body and regulating your emotions and focusing on the mindfulness to help with being impulsive and all the other symptoms, that is absolutely essential for somebody with ADHD to nail first before they focus on fat loss. Some people can do it at the same time, but if somebody has been yo-yo dieting or in that binge restrict cycle for years, then got to stop dieting and focus on the food relationship side of things as a priority.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And if you were to, if let's say you had a client, right, who was very, very busy, parent, business owner, struggled to find the time to get the set meals in, what would your advice be then?
We are going to have to make the time.
Mm.
So, again, thinking outside the box, can you have liquid meals? Could you have a shake or a smoothie? Soups, things like that you could prep in advance and just have at your desk. Ready meals, meal prep companies, making like a snack plate, so having a yogurt and fruit and some crackers with some peanut butter on, like that is fine. It doesn't have to look like a standard meal that you've cooked from scratch. Moving away from so much of the shit we see online about never allowing yourself processed foods and everything has to, be made from scratch. Yet we want the majority of our foods coming from whole food sources, but at times we're going to have to lean on convenience, and that's very, very important. And if people say they don't have time, I always think you don't not have time. If your health is important, if your food relationship is important, if managing your symptoms is important, you're going to have to make the time, because otherwise you'll get to the point where your body forces you to make the time. And again, it's moving people away from thinking it has to be perfect. We all have days like that where we genuinely don't have time. But a lot of the busyness and stress that we feel nowadays is because we're telling ourselves and everybody else, I'm busy, I'm stressed, my diary's full, I've got no time. The more you say it, the more true it becomes. So, you can say, yep, I've got loads on, but I'm choosing to prioritize myself, choosing to prioritize my health. And that doesn't need to be perfect, but it's focusing on imperfect action. So showing up in each moment and doing something rather than doing nothing.
Cool. That was my last question, by the way. I just thought that as you were talking, I thought it'd be a really good one to ask. So thank you for answering that.
It's
been awesome. Yeah, you've gone into great detail. It's helped me a lot. I've got some good notes here, and I think it will help a load of people as well who are listening to this. So thank you for your time. Oh yeah, I did send your webinar, one of your webinars, to a few people I know who I think may find it useful. So hopefully they watched it, and hopefully they will listen to this as well.
Good. Fingers crossed.
What is for those who want to follow you, what's your Instagram handle?
It is Sophia_Apollo_nutrition.
Cool. I'll put that link in the description of this podcast too, so people can easily access you. But yeah, it's been amazing. It's been really good. I've loved this chat.